Just over a century ago, the Elwha River flowed freely into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, as it does today. However, less than a decade ago, a different story could be told. Two monstrous dams divided the length of the river into three parts. And this is the chronicle of the Elwha and Glines Canyon dams and the activists that stood against them. In the early 1900s, the 45-mile-long Elwha River flowed through the Pacific Northwest area and emptied into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Because of this, the Elwha River was the foundation of the Pacific Northwest's wildlife's population. The nutrients found within the salmon provided energy for many of the organisms living in and around the Elwha. In addition, the salmon were seen as sacred beings in the Elwha Klallam tribe culture. They were a staple to what was used for food sources, ceremonies, and trading items. It was a large part of their culture and played a big role in their traditions and lifestyle. That was until the early 1900s, when Thomas Aldwell concocted a brilliant idea. Aldwell would build a structure, a colossal 108-foot-tall dam, eventually known as the Elwha Dam. Construction would begin in 1910, and the dam itself would become operational in 1913. He would profit by producing hydroelectricity, which in turn would power houses, a mill, and the city itself. Aldwell reached out to a Canadian financier who went by the name George Glines. Together, they would build the Elwha Dam and later the Glines Canyon Dam, which was built in 1925 and opened 2 years later. This dam would be 210 feet tall and located 8 miles above the Elwha Dam. Its main purpose would be to power paper and lumber mills. When the original Elwha Dam was constructed, an 1890 law that stated fish passage wherever food fish are wont to ascend was broken. The law required that when a dam operates, passage for the fish through the dam must be available. In 1915, the Washington State Fish Commissioner, Leslie Darwin, offered to let Aldwell bypass the law in return for constructing fish hatcheries. However, shortly after opening, these fish hatcheries were abandoned later in 1922.
So dam construction had a huge effect on the Elwha River and its ecosystem. So when the dams were constructed without fish ladders, the first dam went in 1912. It subsequently failed and was rebuilt in 1914. So the immediate impact, of course, was it cut off fish passage, and the fish stocks that lived upriver were most impacted first. So those were things like pink salmon, Chinook salmon, summer steelhead.
Furthermore, the Native American community was also negatively affected by the construction of these dams. In addition to being left out of the benefits, the Native American tribe, known as Klallam tribe, lost the vital resource of their salmon, whose population was declining rapidly as a result of exclusion of fish ladders and the closure of the hatcheries.
We actually had people, a college team, come by and said they wanted to talk to tribal members that had a strong spiritual tie to the river. And my mouth just dropped open. There's not a tribal member that does not have a strong spiritual tie to the river, that doesn't go down and see how the river's doing or what's going on.
On my behalf of my grandmother, she lived like only about a mile from the first lower dam. She used to like walking down to the river, watching the salmon. But one day that dam was completed, no fish ladders were included so the salmon could continue upstream, and she stood there in tears watching the salmon just banging their heads against and dying from banging against their heads continuously against the dam wall. It was very devastating to her, and she rushed home and told everybody else what she had seen, and the word passed through the tribe quickly, and it was devastating for our fishermen people who survived on it as food.
Yeah, there's not any tribal member that doesn't have a strong spiritual tie to the river.
Beginning in the later 1970s and 1980s, activists began to fight back against the company Crown Zellerbach Corporation that owned the dams. On August 27, 1973, a case later known as the Bolt decision began. The trial would decide fishing rights for the lower Elwha Clallam tribe and whether to recognize neighboring native tribes such as the Samish, Snoqualmie, Steilacoom, and Duwamish. The trial lasted over 4.5 months and went on almost non-stop. On February 12th of 1974, federal judge George Bolt ruled favor of the lower Elwha Clallam tribe. However, in the same case, George Bolt ruled against recognizing the other native tribes and their treaty rights. George Bolt's ruling was upheld in 1975 in a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and in 1979, the Supreme Court largely endorsed George Bolt's ruling. George Bolt's ruling in the Bolt decision was highly controversial and led to protests between native tribes, the Washington state government, and fishermen. The Bolt decision set the stage for native tribes to finally be given back their rights. The momentum for tribal rights continued into the 1980s, when in 1986 the Secretary of Interior stated that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission did not have the jurisdiction to license the Glines Canyon Dam. Shortly after that, groups such as the Sierra Club, Seattle Audubon Society, and Friends of the Earth petitioned for the full removal of both dams.
We started working towards dam removal officially in 1976. So I was not an elder then. I was like 26 years old. So we actually I was the tribal chairman, and so we had lots and lots of meetings with Crown Zellerbach and others, environmental groups, government, state and federal government agencies, and we had lots of meetings. And so my point is that I wasn't an elder at the time that the dams were removed, because it took quite a process.
6 representatives of Washington state banded together to form House Resolution 4844, also known as the Elwha River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act. The Elwha River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act granted the Secretary of Interior permission to obtain both hydroelectric dams. In addition, House Resolution 4844 outlined the protection of the restoration of the Elwha, such as maintaining the water quality and funding the fish hatcheries. President George H.W. Bush signed the act into law on October 24, 1992, and it became Public Law 102-495.
And then they had to study everything again for the next 20 years. So interestingly, I was an elder by the time the dam was being removed, and my whole generation was. And of course, we were really happy about it. And we had a number of people from all the different families had done some work on the process. And pushing back to the businesses and the government agencies to get them to do this was unbelievable. But in the 70s, it was the time of activism, which you're starting to see right now all over the country. Well, that's what was going on back in those days. And so it was almost a joke when we said, just take the dams out. Because we were all like 25 to 30, the biologists and the tribal people. We never dreamed they would actually move in that direction. So.
We have something like 2,000 dams over 2 meters tall in the country, and a lot of them are coming to the end of their life expectancy, their useful life. And so society, you'll have to decide what to do with a lot of these dams.
It was spiritual, it was emotional, there's a lot of pride in it, and it's a process. So dam removal and restoration is go on for the next generations.